In 1976, the residents of Circleville, Ohio began receiving unsettling and ominous letters in the mail. These letters reached many of the small town's 14,000 residents and contained personal information, threats, and accusations.
And a lot of it was vindictive in tone, nasty in tone. There was sexually oriented material or accusations of vulgar is the only way, to really describe it.
These letters would haunt Circleville and its citizens for over 24 years. It's rumored around 1,000 letters would be sent during this period. Despite these letters reaching several recipients through their reign, a few of the victims in particular seemed to be targeted more than others. The first official letter to ever be sent was addressed to Gordon Massey, the school district superintendent. Like many of the letters that would come later, this letter began with threats and accusations towards Mr. Massey. The letter accused Gordon Massey of being a cheater and philanderer. The writer claimed he had been harassing female school bus drivers to join him on nights out on the town. Some of these letters would be signed by the writer as the Watcher of Westfall. Another one of the Watcher's victims was a school bus driver by the name of Mary Gillespie. Mary's first letter warned her to stay away from Gordon Massey, claiming they knew she was having an affair on her husband Ron. A week later, Mary would receive another letter, but she kept it to herself. Soon after, her husband Ron would receive a letter of his own. This letter had a return address which led back to Gordon Massey's family home. The Watcher of Westfall was toying with them. Ron Gillespie would obtain his second letter on April 14, 1977. After this, the Watcher would begin constructing crude signs along the roads of Circleville. The signs mainly consisted of accusations of Gordon Massey having sexual relations with the Gillespie's young daughter. Ron would wake up early every morning before work to take the signs down before his daughter could see them on her bus ride to school. The Gillespies became overwhelmed and reached out to Ron's sister Karen and her husband Paul Freshour. Together they decided to write a letter to whom they believed the Watcher of Westfall was in hopes to end this once and for all. Many believe the group sent this letter to another school bus driver named David Longberry. Their belief was that he had become angry after Mary dismissed his advances. "9:50 p.m. Mary is out of town with friends. Ron arrives home from work. Shortly after, he receives a phone call. It is widely assumed the voice on the other line is none other than the Watcher of Westfall. Although we may never know what words were exchanged, what we do know is that this interaction led Ron to grab his gun, kiss his daughter goodnight, and race out his front door towards his pickup truck. Ron peels out of his driveway at 10 p.m. At 10:25 p.m., Ron and his truck are found only 10 minutes away on 5 Points Pike Road. His truck is mangled from hitting a tree head-on, and his body is partially ejected from the driver's seat. Ron is pronounced dead shortly after. Sheriff Radcliffe would rule Ron's death as an accident. This would confuse Ron's brother-in-law, Paul Freshour, who claims Radcliffe had initially confided to him that Ron's death may have involved foul play. The toxicology report shows that Ron had a blood alcohol level 1.5 times the legal limit. Ron's friends and family have gone on record many times stating that Ron wasn't much of a drinker and wouldn't leave his daughter at home to go drinking and driving. It was also stated that a round had been fired from Ron's gun, but the round was never recovered. The actions of the sheriff's department led many to speculate that Radcliffe may have covered up Ron's death. Sheriff Radcliffe was running for president of the National Sheriff's Association and knew he would need to downplay the events taking place in his small town if he wanted to be re-elected. Even the Watcher of Westfall themselves called the investigation extremely sloppy and poor. The Watcher went as far as to send more letters urging the community to continue an even deeper investigation into Ron's death. 6 years later, the case would take a strange turn. Mary would notice a large sign targeted at her daughter on the side of the road. Fed up, she parked and quickly went to tear the sign down. There was a box attached to the sign that, when opened, would fire a round from a gun. Luckily for Mary, she opened it in a way that would not set off the booby trap. The police were quick to realize the writer did an awful job at scratching off the serial number on the gun. Authorities were able to search the numbers and track the gun to its original owner. It belonged to Paul Freshour. When questioned, Paul claimed the gun had been missing for weeks. He denied having any involvement with the attempted murder of Mary Gillespie. The events that took place next put Sheriff Radcliffe under heavy scrutiny. He asked Paul to subject himself to a writing test. But that's not the strange part. Sheriff Radcliffe encouraged Paul to try and recreate the writer's style. This is not the correct procedure whatsoever. After Paul's handwriting was examined, experts couldn't confidently say whether Paul was the writer or not. With mostly circumstantial evidence, Paul Freshour was convicted of attempted murder of Mary Gillespie, and the majority of Circleville believed that he was the watcher of Westfall. After his conviction, Paul would continue to swear he was innocent. Everyone believed that once Paul was incarcerated, the letters would cease. They were wrong. In fact, the letters became more frequent after Paul was imprisoned. Police were so sure he was sending the letters from prison, they threw him in solitary confinement. Nothing changed, however, and the letters were being sent to residents in Circleville and even the surrounding areas. Paul even received his own letter while in prison. The writer mocked him and told him he would never get out of prison. After a thorough investigation by the warden of the prison, he was beyond convinced that Paul couldn't be the one behind the letters. The authorities stubbornly ignored the warden's conclusion and still believed they had the writer behind bars. Paul was finally paroled in May of 1994. Paul maintained a blog about the case and his thoughts about the entire story until his death in 2012. Paul's blog post claims the prosecutor who convicted him, Mr. Klein, had made sure only 39 letters out of a reported 1,000 were shown in court because many of them referenced Klein himself in all his wrongdoings. Whoever the watcher of Westfall was, they knew intimate details about several of the residents of Circleville and was right about a few things. The writer was correct about Mary and Gordon's affair. The writer accused Prosecutor Klein of getting a schoolteacher pregnant before having her killed because it would ruin his image. Letters called out the town's coroner, Dr. Ray Carroll, of participating in inappropriate behavior with kids in the community. During an investigation from an Ohio TV station, a local family confirmed the rumors that Klein did get a schoolteacher pregnant. However, Klein was cleared soon after. Later, Dr. Carroll would be charged with 12 counts of immorality, corruption of a minor, pornography, sex crimes, obscenity, and indecent exposure in December of 1993. According to Martin Yant, the most knowledgeable journalist on this bizarre case, claimed the police failed to follow up on a crucial lead involving a yellow El Camino that was spotted near the booby trap sign Mary tore down. The El Camino was spotted by another school bus driver who witnessed a man standing next to the vehicle pretending to urinate. The description of the man was nowhere near Paul Freshour's appearance. This man was never identified. Although Paul would always retain his innocence, he would go on to state, "I take full responsibility for the gun." When asked further about this, he claimed he didn't want to speak about the gun any longer. A close friend of the family would later come out saying that Paul's son, Mark, admitted to stealing the gun. It's assumed that Paul was trying to protect his son from getting into trouble. Paul would file for divorce from his then-wife Karen in 1982. Paul received custody of their children and many of the assets in the divorce. Martin Yant describes Karen as a very, very angry and manipulative woman who was still planting negative stories about Paul in the 1990s. Let's take a look at the current timeline. 1976. Letters begin. 1977. Ron tragically dies. 1982. Paul and Karen divorce. 1983. Mark supposedly steals Paul's gun, and Karen borrows a typewriter from Paul's sister. 1984. Mary narrowly avoids death by booby trap, and Paul's missing gun is involved in the attempted murder. Not only was Karen noticeably upset about the divorce, she also at the time of the booby trap had a boyfriend whose appearance was eerily similar to the man seen near the yellow El Camino. Not only that, but if the police had investigated the lead, they would have uncovered that Karen had a cousin who did, indeed, own a yellow El Camino. It's important to note that the original letters from 1976 until 1982 were handwritten in block letter format, and the first letters to have been created using a typewriter only appeared post-1982. I think it's safe to assume Karen, with the help of others, took over the mantle of the Watcher of Westfall, setting up her husband Paul and successfully getting him convicted of the attempted murder of Mary Gillespie. I don't think we'll ever know who the original Watcher of Westfall was, unless someone decides to come forward. I'll see you on the other side.